On today's show, the Atlanta Hawks gave up 50 points. Yes, 50 points in the first quarter in what was a catastrophic performance out of the gate for Atlanta. They were better after that, but the damage was done, and they lose for the 8th time in the last 11 games. The Hawks not playing well, and for the first time this season, they are below 500. We'll have much more coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1369 of Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Wednesday evening into Thursday here in mid-December. And I also want to encourage you at the top of the show to make us your first listen each and every day. Check out the Locked On Hawks podcast across podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, Google Play, and we're also, of course, on YouTube on the video side. And yeah, it was a rough one for the Atlanta Hawks on this Wednesday. I am not prone to hyperbole or saying things that are not necessarily level-headed in the middle of basketball games, but I used the word embarrassing about the first quarter on Twitter on Wednesday night, and I believe that. In fact, I'm not even sure that was even strong enough. It was pretty much catastrophic out of the gate for the Hawks on Wednesday in Orlando. And while there is other stuff to point to, the Hawks played pretty well, actually, if you started the game 30 minutes later on this Wednesday. But the damage was done. If you didn't watch this game, I would encourage you, honestly, just to kind of see what was going on about the first quarter. But it was 50-22 at the end of 12 minutes of play. There were records set by Orlando. We'll come back to that in a second. But in the end, the Hawks have now lost 8 of the last 11 games. They were down by 29 points at one point, had their worst quarter of the entire season. And that was that quarter. They're now 3-10 in the last 13 games on the road. And for the first time all year long, the Hawks are below 500. They have been 500 a few times, 0-0, etc. They're now below 500 for the first time at 14-15, and it is not going particularly well. Now, I will always give you some context and try to not go crazy because, again, there was enough to point to that wasn't like a complete and utter disaster, but that first quarter was inexcusable, and that is certainly the headliner of this particular evening for the Hawks. So we'll get into the game as always now, and I certainly want to invite you to subscribe to the podcast. And what we do here is try to give you a comprehensive look at what transpired in the game, as well as some of my own takeaways and analysis. And when there's not a game, I'll have guests on and talk about certainly what is going on big picture, mailbag questions, etc. But in the latest news and all that. But first, by the way, before we dive into the game, I want to encourage everyone to read the interview and the update on Bob Rathman, my friend, my close friend, I would say, who is the play-by-play voice for the Hawks on the TV side. He talked to Jeff Schultz of The Athletic, and that's certainly worth reading. Bob spent 5 nights in the hospital and had more than a dozen tests. He said he feels good. He's eager to return to work. I know he's watching the game tonight. John Collins shouted him out on the broadcast. But shouts to Bob. He might even be listening to this podcast. I know he's a listener regularly. He's been on the show before. I'm very glad that he's feeling all right. But certainly want to keep Bob in your prayers and thoughts as he gets closer to coming back to work, which would be a lot of fun to have him back on screen. Anyway, beyond that, the Hawks game itself, anyway. Orlando had been playing better. If you want to lay that out and credit Orlando, and I want to be sure to do that on this show. Nothing in the NBA is one team only. It takes 2 teams, and the Magic played very well in the first quarter of this game in particular, and they've now won 4 games in a row. So this is not a terrible team. They're not good by any means. They are still, even with the win, 9-20 this year, so I don't want to go overboard. But they're 8-9 at home. They're competitive in that building. I was just there 2 weeks ago, and the Hawks were the better team on that day, but certainly Orlando's not an embarrassing product right now. Injury-wise, the Hawks are still short-handed as well. Collins and Murray still out, by the way. Collins did some work on the broadcast tonight, and the 2-week mark for him to be updated is actually on Thursday. So it just goes from basically assuming that he's out the last 2 weeks to him being more like day-to-day. But Lauren Williams, the AJC, relayed earlier today on Wednesday that Nate McMillan said Collins has not been doing much beyond spot shooting. And I don't think he's super close to coming back. It will kind of surprise me if he plays on Friday, for instance. But he is getting closer, it seems. He was pretty optimistic on the broadcast. Didn't give a timeline, but said he was hoping to be back soon. As for the rest of the injury report, it was just those 2 guys that were out. Trae Young was questionable with the back soreness that got him out of the game on Monday, and he famously got banged up on Sunday in that win against Chicago. It was multiple things. In fact, Lauren Jabara of Valley Sports Southeast reported that Trae has not had any feeling in his left pinky and is actually wearing a splint on that non-shooting hand. So he's not 100% healthy either. He ended up playing this one. Orlando was actually missing some guys as well: Wendell Carter Jr., Jalen Suggs, Gary Harris, etc. But at tip-off, with Trae Young playing, the Hawks were, according to our friends at BetOnline, 3-point favorites on the road. And obviously, they did not cover, nor did they win outright in this spot. So with all that said, it's time to dive into the first quarter, and I'll give some more context at the very end of the game about how I thought about this entire performance. But once again, I've used the word catastrophic. I've used the word embarrassing. I've used the word inexcusable. All those things apply. The Hawks did force a shot clock violation on the first possession of the game, which is kind of funny because the Hawks, nothing else went right after that for Atlanta. It was a 17-4 run by the Magic to open the game up. They made 7 of their first 10 shots and rebounded 2 of the first 3 misses as well. The offense was pretty bad for the Hawks as well. It was not just the defense. The offense was very bad in the first quarter. Rotationally, it was what you would expect, but there was a lot of foul trouble as well. Bogey has the first sub for Jalen Johnson because Jalen had 2 fouls in a hurry. Then Jarrett Culver came in for DeAndre Hunter because he had 2 fouls. And Hunter's second foul was on a really bad closeout against Bol Bol for 3 shots, just a weirdly bad play by DeAndre. And then it was Trent Forrest and Okongwu as the 8th and 9th guys, and then Justin Holiday as the 10th. In the second half, it was only 9 guys that played. They went to Holiday instead of Culver, and I actually think that they were not going to play Culver in this game, if I had to guess. He was kind of on the fringes on Monday as well, and Sunday. So I think that because of the fouls, they went to Culver, but I think they were kind of going to go with 9, and they went with Justin in the second half. No matter what, we'll stop there. But a 29-11 start from the Magic in this one. The Hawks scored 6 points in the first 6 minutes of the game. That's really rough. Very few paint touches offensively. They had 5 turnovers in the first 6 minutes, leading directly to 11 points by Orlando. And the defense was even worse, honestly. Orlando was pretty hot from the field and for three-point range, but that was only part of the problem. And after 10.5 minutes, it was 46-17, a 29-point deficit. Ended up being 20 at the end of the first quarter. But at that point, after 10.5 minutes, the Magic had a 177 offensive rating. So what that means is they were scoring 1.77 points per possession. That is an outrageous figure. The league leading number for this season is about 1.2. They were at 1.77. There was a weird offensive foul call on Bogdanovich, and he was seemingly in some pain. He seemed to be fine, but that got Trey and Nate McMillan called for technical fouls back-to-back, and that was not going to be the end of that. Orlando kept scoring. The Hawks did score at the very end of the quarter, 5 points in like the final 90 seconds, but it was, to put it very plainly right now, it was the worst quarter of the season in every way for the Hawks, both because they were not at full strength, for sure, but they had enough talent. It wasn't like in Memphis where the Hawks had basically an uncompetitive roster. In this game, Trey played, and Capella played, and Bogdanovich played, and they had a lot of their guys available. And to go down there and be down 50-22 to Orlando is just, again, inexcusable. The numbers are what they are. It's crazy. Orlando set a franchise record for points in a quarter. That says it all right there. But the Magic are also a bad offensive team. They're not like horrible, but they're a bottom 5, bottom 6 offensive team in the league. Also the most points allowed in the quarter by the Hawks this year. No surprise there. And also the Magic were 1 point short of the NBA record for first quarter scoring. The Warriors had that record, 51 points, back in 2019. So, yeah, it was just a nightmare stuff on offense, on defense for the Hawks, and then offense too, honestly. But at the end of the day, the Magic had a 166 offensive rating in the first quarter. They made 6 threes. They got to the line 13 times. That's a sneaky bad part of that performance as well. And the Hawks were genuinely awful on offense. They had 22 points on 28 possessions. That's a terrible ratio. They were 0-7 from 3. They had 7 turnovers, 38% from the floor. I have numbers all up and down here, but I'll just stop now to say that first quarter was as bad as it seems on paper. If you didn't watch it, I'm trying to explain to you how bad it was, but it really was that bad. And after the game, Nate talks about just not kind of being scrappy enough, all those things that you might say. But look, and I definitely saw this. We'll come back to this later on as well, about people kind of saying this was like a fireable offense for Nate and all that stuff. He and the staff deserve blame for sure for the first quarter. It's mutual blame in my mind. I think the staff gets blame. When it's this bad, it's everybody. It's the players, it's the staff, it's preparation, it's execution, it's everything wrapping into one. And I will say it's probably good for Nate and his status that they weren't like losing by 50 in this game, because they could have lost 50 points in this game very easily. The fact that they were able to kind of battle back is probably better for the perception of this one, because if you just didn't watch the game and only saw the score, 11-point loss to Orlando is not good, but it's not like a complete disaster. Whereas if you watch the first quarter, it was quite bad, and people were asking me pretty much every 30 seconds whether Nate was going to get fired at the end of the day. Not what you want to see at the top of a game in December. All right, we'll get into the rest of the game in a second. I promise you on that. But first, a word from our sponsors on the show. Today's show is brought to you by ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN protects your privacy and security online. That is a huge part of the appeal of ExpressVPN. If you happen to know that already, or something you might not have known, and you can always use ExpressVPN to unlock movies and shows that are only available in other countries. Maybe you run out of stuff to watch on Netflix. If so, this will actually change your worldview. That you can actually binge shows like The Office on UK Netflix. It's so simple to do. Just sign in Netflix, fire up the app, change the location to the UK, refresh Netflix, and that is it. ExpressVPN also lets you control where sites want to think you're located. That actually allows you to choose from almost 100 different countries. Just imagine all of the libraries you can go through, not just Netflix either, all kinds of apps and services, Hulu, BBC iPlayer, YouTube, you name it, they all work with ExpressVPN. There are hundreds of VPNs out there, but the reason I definitely endorse ExpressVPN is actually because it's actually ridiculously fast. And there's never any buffering or lag. You can stream in HD with no problem, and it works on all of your devices, phones, media consoles, smart TVs, and more. Watch what you want to watch on the big screen or on the go. And if you want to get hundreds of accesses to new shows and more, go to expressvpn.com/lockedon right now. You can get an extra 3 months as well of ExpressVPN for free if you use that promo code. It is expressvpn.com/lockedon. One more time, expressvpn.com/lockedon to learn more. Imagine you were hanging out with some friends, putting back a few drinks. A few drinks becomes a few too many drinks. And as the evening comes to an end, people start to head out and you think calling for a ride in some form or fashion. But you think, nah, you live nearby. You can make it home okay. It's no big deal. What are the odds you'll get pulled over anyway? And even if so, what's the worst that can happen? Your insurance goes up or you lose your license? Well, or you could lose your job or total your car or even kill someone. Everyone knows about the risks of driving drunk. The results are tragic and often deadly. However, that does not stop everybody from getting behind the wheel when under the influence. That's why police officers are out there right now looking for impaired drivers on the roads to save lives. So if you think you're okay to drive after a few drinks, think again, play it safe, and plan ahead to get a ride. It only takes one mistake to change your life or someone else's life forever. Drive sober or get pulled over. So from here, the Hawks did play much better. In fact, they won the second quarter. They won the third quarter. They played even in the fourth quarter. And they won the last 3 quarters of this game by 17 points. And in general, that's pretty good. I thought the bench unit started things off better in the second quarter, more juice than the starters had at the start. That was a low bar. I do think that through basically a quarter and a half of this game, the only guy that I would say was playing to his level, his normal level or higher, was Trent Forrest. I thought Forrest played pretty well in the first quarter and a half. Everybody else, to varying degrees, admittedly, was below their norm. I thought Capella was probably the runner-up on this list, but nobody else was good in the first quarter and a half. The Hawks did finally come alive, and the big story in the second quarter was DeAndre Hunter, actually. The Hawks had a 7-0 run. Hunter made the first 3 of the game. The Hawks missed their first 9 threes, so they didn't have a 3 for the first 18 minutes of this basketball game. That's really bad. Hunter made 3 threes in pretty short order. Hawks didn't really actually make a comeback with them because they couldn't get stops, though. I do think, and I've said this before on the show, but I'll say it now for maybe new listeners or whatever, but Hunter took 9 threes in this game. That's a good thing. I think Hunter should be taking more threes. I've been saying that for a long time. And even if he's not, they shouldn't all be self-created, though. I want to see him make catch and shoot threes, but I thought that him getting up threes was probably encouraging, even though he obviously made a bunch of them in short order. The Hawks also they were down by 22 to 25 or so for most of the quarter, and then they had a big run at the end of the first half to actually make things interesting the rest of the game. It was an 11-0 run in the final 2 minutes of the first half, with the Magic first leaving Jalen Johnson just completely open for a corner 3 on an inbounds pass. That was just a terrible breakdown by the Magic defense. Then Hunter hit a 3, and then Hunter had 5 more points at the end of the quarter in the last 40 seconds. So 11-0 run, and honestly, I thought Hunter, along with everybody else, essentially other than Forrest, was really bad in the first quarter and a half. And then he was really hot at the end of the second quarter. He played the entire quarter in the second and had a career high for scoring in a quarter with 20 points. He only ended up the night with 25, so basically he did almost all of his damage in that quarter. But he hit 4 threes, he got to the line 4 times, and he was a big reason why the Hawks were in this game, just because of that run. Because if they were down by 28 at the half, it's basically over. But the fact that the Hawks were able to get back to 14 down at halftime felt like this was actually a basketball game again. They scored 40 points in the second quarter. And again, being down by 14 at the half is not good, but it's not the same thing as being down by 29. So there was some life there. Still defensively, it was rough the entire way, but at least they were in the game. After halftime, the Hawks got to 10 quickly. Capella had a back-to-back dunk and a layup at the outset. And offensively, the Hawks were kind of pretty good, honestly. They were 6 of 9 from the floor, only 1 turnover to open up the third quarter. One of the misses was a pretty bad process air ball by Trey, but other than that, it was pretty solid. Hunter had a nice pass, actually, which was good to see from him. I thought Jalen Johnson was really good early in the third quarter with some activity, had a block shot, had back-to-back nice cuts and finishes around the rim, and the lead was down to 9 for Orlando. And there was some genuine optimism there for the Hawks as they were like kind of in the game and the better team down 9, like you're in a decent spot there. But they could not get stops. The biggest issue really the whole game, probably, if you had to circle one thing, aside from just the first quarter in bold letters, was put up at that defense. They just could not get containment on the perimeter. And it wasn't just every individual player. Obviously Trey and AJ is not the best defensive backcourt in the world, just to put it very plainly. But I thought Hunter had a bad defensive game. I thought Jalen had some trouble. I thought the backups, maybe Forrest was okay, but Bogey has been rough defensively since he came back, and that's not like unexpected because of the knee and all that stuff. But he's been pretty rough, etc. So it was kind of everybody. But that was a problem throughout the game. They got a free point for Cole Anthony, a technical foul late in the third quarter, and the Hawks were down by 8 points in the final minute of the third quarter. That was as close as it was after it was 12-4 in the early going by Orlando. It was not closer than 8 again in the rest of the game. The Hawks allowed three of the last possession of the third quarter to go back down by 11 points. They were still in the game. That was a big shot, though, by Orlando at the end. And defensively, it was really rough through that point. The Hawks didn't score. Actually, the fourth quarter was the biggest slog. The first three minutes or so of the fourth quarter was 3-0 in favor of Orlando. The Hawks didn't score for 3 minutes. Orlando only had one bucket. It was a 3. And Bogey kind of broke that. Nate won a challenge early in the fourth quarter. That was probably a good decision overall to kind of take free throws off the board for Orlando. The Hawks were down by basically between 10 and 14 for like 6 or 7 minutes in a row. They were just kind of hanging in that range. The run never came. Unfortunately, Capella went to the locker room with about 5 minutes to go. He did not look to be moving at his 100% level in the second half, and the Hawks said later that he had right calf tightness. After the game, Nate didn't say much beyond that. Obviously, Capella being shorthanded or out is not good at all, but that's, basically there was nothing to add from Nate, so we'll kind of all hold our breath there because he's so important to this team. Of note, by the way, Capella's injury is the different leg. He missed the game on Monday with left Achilles soreness. I think there was probably some prevention and probably a little bit of back-to-back stuff on Monday, but it was a different leg. This time it's the right calf, so we'll see what the actual injury is, if there is one. But that's one the Hawks cannot afford to be without a Capella for any length of time. The Hawks were still within like 9 again. Bogey had a 3, and then there was a big run, 9-2 by the Magic to kind of break it open, go up by 16. I think the Magic has some pretty good fortune in that stretch with some shot making. But that's the price of being down 29. Things have to go perfectly for you from that point forward, and they didn't quite do that. The Magic made enough shots, and credit to them for playing well in this game. But the Hawks got it down to 9 again with like 1:10 left, but it was never really in doubt down the stretch, and the Hawks were able to go sort of over the line, ending up with a 11-point loss, and basically didn't even clear the bench. It was kind of just over at the end of this one. So as far as the numbers are concerned, offensively, the Hawks played well in this game. Now, I hesitate because of how bad the first quarter was to just give them a complete pass on offense, but that was still worse defensively than offensively in the first quarter, I think. And if you look at the numbers, they had a 121 offensive rating. That is excellent. They shot 60% on twos in this game. That is excellent as well. Now, they hit 3 threes in the final 2 minutes that were kind of meaningless-ish, and that made the numbers look better. They were still only 12 of 35 from 3. The Hawks still cannot make threes this season. It's been a theme throughout the year, but that happened again in this one. The numbers were worse than that most of the night. They got to the line 27 times. That's a good number for them, 24 of 27. They had 30 assists and 13 turnovers. Those are both really good numbers. So basically, the Hawks' offensive profile looks great in this game. It's just that they were playing from behind the entire game, and it didn't really matter at the end. Defensively, it was a shambles. Let's just be honest about it. There were some moments. I thought Capella had really good moments. I thought Jalen had good moments, flashes defensively at times around the rim. I thought Trent Forrest did a good job. Hunter had a couple of nice on ball moments, but it was not good defensively in this game. A 132 defensive rating. And it was better after the first quarter, but it was still rough. The Magic hit 16 of 36 from 3, and that's a hat tip for them. So that's what I'm talking about earlier on the show. Like, it's never one team. The Magic made a bunch of shots, and kudos to them for doing that. So, but that doesn't change the fact that the Hawks were bad. So it's basically both sides. The Magic had 30 free throw attempts. That's way too many. That's their biggest strength on offense this year, and they were able to kind of use that to their advantage. The Hawks did not do well on the glass defensively. Basically, when Capella was off the floor, as usual, it was pretty rough. I don't know. The whole thing across the board, it was a mess defensively. There was nothing positive in the numbers, and that's how you give up 135 to a bottom 5 offense in the Magic. All right, we'll have individual breakdowns in a second, as we always do on the podcast. I will go player for player and how they performed and what I saw from them analysis-wise in this game. But first, a word from our sponsors on the show. Today's show is brought to you by Built Bar. Can we actually hit the pause button for a second? Now that we're taking a pause, I want to tell you about Built Bar and the new reimagined flavors that they have in store for you. Built Bar has standard all-time flavors that are amazing, but they also have new flavors like Cookie Dough Topper and Coconut Brownie Bar and White Chocolate Peppermint Granola. That peppermint granola flavor is Built Bar's take on a granola bar, so it's more filling and it's also very still tasty. And you also have the cane brownie flavor. That's a puff bar that tastes like you've been biting into a delicious cloud. And for everyone who's not tried Built Bar yet, first of all, I don't know what you're waiting for. Second of all, I also have to tell you, it's the best tasting protein bar ever, and they taste like a candy bar, except it's actually good for you as well. They have nutrition capabilities, as we know, with 100% real chocolate, 17 grams of protein, and shockingly low sugar and calorie counts. Have that first bite, it'll change your life forever. I'm not kidding. There'll be a time before you try these Built flavors, and then there'll be a much better time that's wonderful after you've actually tried those magical, wonderful flavors. I have never had a flavor that I didn't enjoy at Built Bar. I have too many flavors that I actually just love to count, but really, you have to buy and check out all the Built Bars that you're looking for. The best way to maybe do that is to check out a mixed box. They have multiple offerings in the same box. You can sample them multiples at the same time. No matter what you're looking for, find it at Built.com. And if you should check out today, that's the place to go, is Built.com. And if you use the promo code LOCKEDON15, you get 15% off on your order with Built Bar. One more time, that is promo code LOCKEDON15, 15% off at Built.com. Today's show is brought to you by Turo, and Turo is the world's largest car sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want, wherever you want it, from a community of local hosts. Browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget across the US, the UK, Canada, and coming soon to Australia. Book a spacious SUV or minivan if you're looking for that, for a family road trip or something else like that where you need more space, or get a classic or luxury car for a special event or a birthday or a holiday, or you can find affordable economy cars if you're on a budget and just want to get from point A to point B with ease and comfort. Test drive a new electric vehicle as well if you have your eye on that to see how it fits in your everyday life. And many Turo hosts can even deliver the car right to you. Yes, delivered right to you. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions apply. Forget boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com. All right, and it's sort of a mixed bag, as you might expect, and a bad loss in some ways for the Hawks. The bench numbers were not good, other than Justin Holiday actually was +3, which is funny. He only took one shot. He had 2 points and 2 assists. He didn't look great to me. He looked better in the second half than the first half, as most guys did. I thought he was okay, but he played a bunch. There was no Aaron Holiday in this game, which was not, at least somewhat of a surprise to me. Culver played 4 minutes, didn't do much in the first half. He had 2 turnovers, didn't have the same juice that he's had recently, and then maybe that's why he didn't play in the second half, because Culver has to play hard and be flying around because of his offensive limitations, and he really wasn't doing that. Trent Forrest, 4 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists. Didn't miss 4 shots and 0-2 from 3. That's kind of typical, but he didn't play a ton in the second half either. Bogdanovich, creaky on defense for sure, but had 17 points on 15 shots. That's not so bad. 5 rebounds, 3 assists. Offensively, only 3 of 9 from 3 in this one. But I thought Bogey offensively was fine. Just the defense, and he was part of the problem in the first quarter as well, as everybody was. Okongwu had kind of a mixed game. He had a lot of fouls early, ended up getting that under control later on and playing 26 minutes, 15 points, 11 rebounds, a nice double-double from him. Had a steal as well. Rebounding-wise, there were some rough moments for Onyeka, but I thought he gave good effort and good juice on offense in the second half in particular. He just played fine, I thought, generally. First quarter, like everybody else was bad. Jalen, kind of similar. Second half, much better. First half, not so much. Had 4 blocks. That's good to see. Had one really nice stretch in the third quarter. 9 points on 9 shots. It's not great. He's definitely not getting guarded like a shooter, and with good reason. He's not a shooter right now. Also, no rebounds is not good for him in 19 minutes. AJ Griffin was okay. 15 points on 9 shots is obviously really good, but defensively, I thought he was particularly bad in this one. Had a block, had 2 rebounds, but didn't do much on defense. He did make a shot in the second half, was a little bit more judicious than usual, more efficient, and like kind of low-key on offense, but made his shots. Capella, before he exited, 16 points, 6 rebounds in 22 minutes, made 8 of 10 from the floor. A couple nice rim rejections, or at least like walling up at the rim moments from him defensively. He was just okay for him. He was still good overall because he's a good player, but he wasn't like a standout in this one either. And then Trae Young, very weird game for Trae. Trae had 16 assists. That's a lot of assists. You cannot fake 16 assists. I didn't think that Trae even had like his best passing game, which is kind of funny because he had a season high in assists, but I don't think he like played very well. In fact, he was the only guy on the roster that was more than -11. Now, part of that's playing a ton of minutes, but 19 points on 17 shooting possessions, 18 shooting possessions. Like, he wasn't good as a scorer again in this one. He continues to miss shots at an alarming level. He was 6 of 15 from the floor and 1 of 5 from 3. His numbers, I've talked about them on every podcast. I'm not going to do it again here, but he's got to make shots at some point. He's just not making shots. 5 turnovers. And then defensively, it was bad. It's often bad, but it was, I thought, notably bad even for Trey in this one. So obviously the assists are really helpful, and he had more than half of the team's assists in this game. He still is a positive offensive player, even when he's not making shots, because he is so effective at passing and ball handling and just knifing through defenses. But I don't think Trey, on a night when he had 16 assists, was particularly good by his standards. Again, his standards are super high, but he's just not playing that well for him right now. Okay, so my final thought on the game itself. I don't want to go crazy. Again, I open with this. I'll close with it as well. It was pretty embarrassing in the first quarter. And I do think, again, it was a mixed blame. Everyone's always looking for the blame pie, who to blame and whose fault is it and what changes can be made. And I get it. That first quarter can inspire that more. And that's one of those times when, like, I don't even mind people trying to fire the coach. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not someone who's going to come on the podcast and really do that. It's not really my thing. But when you're down 50-22 against Orlando and it's a total no-show, like, I do understand that impetus from a fan of basketball. I get it. It was that bad in the first quarter. But it was players, it was execution, it was Orlando making shots, it was Nate being Nate and the staff kind of, it seemed like they were unprepared to play, which is not a good sign by anybody. The vibes are bad too. Like, not a lot of like juice around the bench. And I'm not a huge body language guy either, but it was not particularly vibey early in this game. So with all the stuff swirling around about the trade rumors and Nate and Trey and Trey versus everybody else, as reported by Sam Amick, and it's not good right now for the Hawks, and that's not going to be sugarcoated by me right now. I do think that some of the alarm is a little bit overstated, because even with this loss, like, I've seen people talking about like tanking now, and that's just not a reality. The Hawks are still right now, even with a very bad stretch of basketball, tied for the 8 seed in the East. And like, as long as Trey and like there's some semblance of health, they're not going to pull the plug and tank. I think it's pretty obvious, but in case you need to hear that, they're not going to do that. And look, even with all this, they're 2 games out of 5th. So like, the East being jumbled up definitely matters. They're 3.5 games out of 3rd right now. Yes, Boston and Milwaukee are not going to be caught by the Hawks. That's pretty obvious at this stage. But I think that having Murray and Collins would be helpful. I don't think that this is one of those nights where you just like give up on the season. But again, the first quarter was so bad. Catastrophe is the word I keep coming back to in my brain. Embarrassing. I don't use those words lightly either. I'm not someone who's going to go like yell and scream, but it actually was embarrassing in the first quarter from the Hawks. Like, and there you go. All right. So from here, the Hawks go to Charlotte on Friday, and the Hornets are having a terrible season so far. They've had lots of injuries throughout the year. They lost at home tonight in overtime to the Pistons. There was one ray of light for Charlotte, and that's LaMelo Ball came back. He's only played 3 games before tonight, so 4 games all season long out of 28 for the Hornets. So that's part of why they've been so bad this year. He was actually plus 16, and again, they lost by 7, which is tough to do. So they're more at full strength. And you might remember one of Charlotte's 7 wins this year was actually a pretty stunning victory in Atlanta back in October when they scored 126 and beat the Hawks by 17 points. That was a bizarre night, and the Hawks just played terrible in that game. But so maybe we'll see a little revenge on that one. The Hawks are better than the Hornets, even without Murray and Collins, and even on the road, that's a game the Hawks should win, but that's also the same thing I would say about this game. So nothing is assured. They have a day off on Thursday, no rest advantage for Charlotte, or they're just not being able to travel between games, but obviously Orlando to Charlotte, not the longest trip in the world, so the Hawks should be relatively fresh in that game, and yeah, we'll see. I am traveling on Thursday, so barring a trade or barring some large news event on Thursday, I'm not going to be recording a podcast. So my next show will be after the game on Friday. I will pledge to you to be back from Parts Unknown on Friday after the game. I'll have a podcast in some form, so please stay tuned for all of that. I'm also writing about the Hawks more these days at patreon.com/BTRowland. So if you want to read that and support that work, I definitely encourage you to do so. Please also subscribe to this podcast, Locked On Hawks, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, Odyssey app, Google Play, all those places. I definitely thank you for listening and subscribing across the board there. Auto download if you want to support the show. It's the best way to do that. Also on YouTube, every show should be there in some form or fashion. Thank you for listening, everybody. I'm sure this is not going to be a hugely downloaded episode given the state of play on this loss, but certainly some interesting stuff to discuss. And we'll see how the Hawks respond, because they have a chance to get back to 500 on Friday and sort of alleviate some of the schedule stuff, some of the disaster stuff here. Final note here on the way out, the Hawks should be favored in their next 4 games. Famous last words. But we'll see if they can take care of business along the way. All right, everybody, enjoy the rest of your week as we head into Thursday and Friday, and I will be back after the game on Friday. Stay tuned. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.